Stay out of the way, older lady, and just celebrate Christmas there. It seems that after being invited to spend the Christmas vacation together, Margaret has been kicked out of the house. First things first, I need to tell Jeffrey about Margaret's true nature. Somehow, I'll expose Margaret's facade. I refuse to be family with someone like her. I am Michelle, 72 years old, living with my son, Jeffrey. That's because Jeffrey is nearing 40, still single, and my husband passed away 3 years ago. Jeffrey used to live alone, but he moved back home when he changed jobs, and it was closer to his workplace. Our current house is a single story, which might look new at a glance, but was actually remodeled a while ago. It used to be a nearly broken down place, but we remodeled it on my husband's insistence due to years of deterioration and poor fittings. As a result, the remodeled house has become comfortable and clean. From this perspective, my husband seemed like a family-loving man who decided to remodel for our comfort, but in reality, it wasn't so, and he was a source of long-term trouble. He was a traditional, stubborn man outside, but free-spirited. At home, he acted as if he was the center, imposing his rules, and would berate me if I deviated slightly from what he wanted. His favorite phrase was, "Who do you think provides the food here?" However, he was out playing poker, horse racing, and casinos, leaving us with barely enough to live on. Still, he acted arrogantly in front of me and Jeffrey. He would cancel family outings for poker or miss school events, not just once or twice. I could have divorced him and raised Jeffrey alone, but I refused to be defeated and stayed until the end. Jeffrey, too, endured silently in front of his father, never showing tears. My husband left us with a small inheritance, this remodeled house, and, most importantly, my dear Jeffrey, when he passed away from illness. For me, having my beloved son means I'm not lonely. Jeffrey, unlike his father, has always been kind from a young age. He's selflessly caring and can't ignore someone in trouble, but he's also self-sacrificing, hesitant to express his opinions, and tends to be swayed by others. I'll never be like my father. He has often put himself in difficult situations to help others. He once lent his notes to a classmate, never got them back, and his test results suffered. Despite wanting to join a club he liked, he ended up in one he wasn't interested in because a friend asked him. My friend said he wouldn't know anyone else in the club, so he asked me to join with him. Despite his selfless nature, I worry his excessive kindness might lead him into trouble someday. His current workplace has a good environment, but it's mostly male, with little talk about women. Now that my husband is gone, I'd be alone if Jeffrey marries. Though it would be lonely, I hoped he would meet a wonderful woman and start a family. Then one day, Jeffrey made a sudden confession. I've promised to marry someone. I want her to meet you, Mom. I was overjoyed, almost jumping up. Jeffrey, nearing 40, working among men, commuting between work and home, living with his mother, he's not the most sought-after type. That a woman wants to marry him is such a joy. If things go smoothly, and Jeffrey marries her, he will of course leave my side. It would be a lie to say I wouldn't feel lonely, but as a mother wishing for Jeffrey's happiness, I couldn't be happier. If you've chosen her, I definitely want to meet her. What's she like? She's a hardworking woman I met at a party a senior took me to 6 months ago. She has the strength and resilience to overcome tough times, which made me think we could build a home together. That's why I want to introduce her to you, Mom. Jeffrey's eyes sparkled as he spoke, a look I had never seen before. If Jeffrey speaks of a woman with such eyes, she must be a wonderful lady. I was looking forward to meeting the woman Jeffrey confidently chose. Then, on the promised day, Jeffrey brought his girlfriend home. Mom, this is Margaret, the woman I've been dating and considering marrying. However, the woman Jeffrey brought neither introduced herself nor nodded in greeting, just stood there silently. At first glance, she seemed haughty and cold. Honestly, she wasn't the type I imagined Jeffrey would fall for. She continued to ignore everything as if nothing happened, barely greeting, and just surveyed the house. She sipped the tea I offered with disgust, wiping everything she touched with disinfectant wipes, a series of odd behaviors. At the very least, it's clear these aren't actions one should take on a first meeting with a future mother-in-law. Having only Jeffrey, I secretly dreamed of doting on my daughter-in-law like my own child, but that dream seemed to shatter in an instant. Frankly, I felt uncomfortable in such a short time and didn't want to get too close, even if she was Jeffrey's choice and a future daughter-in-law. It seemed she felt the same, as the days passed without any contact. After Margaret left, I confronted Jeffrey. "You're dating Margaret and want to marry her, right?" From today's encounter, I can't see her appeal. "Margaret's shy around new people. But she's charming, strong, and kind, having overcome tough times." It turned out they met at a party hosted by a coworker. Margaret had been talking endlessly about her hardships and sorrows near Jeffrey. Normally, such pity stories at a party would be unbearable, but Jeffrey felt sorry for her and wanted to save her. Their relationship started with his resolve to make Margaret happy. Whatever the beginning, I thought it was typical Jeffrey, but when it comes to dating and marriage, it is not a simple matter. However, considering today's behavior and how they met, she seemed like a complicated person. In a relationship, she might appear cute. But I had a feeling it would be difficult if they lived together. One day, Jeffrey suddenly said he was moving out. Probably because of Margaret. Thinking about living with that woman I met briefly, I watched Jeffrey with mixed feelings. Then Jeffrey murmured quietly, "I didn't expect Margaret to go ahead with it at this time. We talked about deciding on a date and making a commitment as a couple." "What do you mean, go ahead with? You don't mean..." "The marriage application. She submitted it alone just before noon today." It seemed unreal, but apparently, Margaret couldn't wait and submitted the marriage application by herself, binding them as a couple without Jeffrey knowing. Considering the first impression, the stories from Jeffrey, and this unilateral action, I felt nothing but anxiety. "I'm worried. Are you sure it's okay?" "It's fine. Margaret is a kind woman." "Oh, I got a message from Margaret. She wants you to choose your wedding gift from these options." When I checked the items Margaret had sent, they were all worth several $1,000s. Even for my son's wedding, that's not an amount I can easily afford. Margaret's actions showing such rudeness upon meeting, submitting a marriage application without Jeffrey's knowledge to become a couple, and then demanding ultra-expensive home appliances were simply too audacious. It was surprising that Jeffrey chose someone like her as a life partner, but to celebrate his new beginning, I decided to gift them a state-of-the-art, high-performance air conditioner. "Margaret wants this air conditioner, so I guess this will be my wedding gift to you too, all right?" "Mom, thank you. I appreciate you listening to Margaret's request." It wasn't cheap for me either, but I splurged for the sake of Jeffrey and his beloved's new life. Even after installing the air conditioner Margaret wanted, I received neither thanks nor any contact from her. Is this how people are nowadays? Time passed without any particular communication from Jeffrey or Margaret. They were living in an apartment in the next town, less than an hour's drive from my house, but I heard nothing from them. It's not too far for a visit, but they must be busy with work and their newlywed life, I thought, so I refrained from contacting them. However, a situation arose where I had to reach out. My brother, Jeffrey's uncle, had passed away. He was an uncle to Jeffrey, too, who had loved him when he was a little boy, although he was in contact with him less frequently now. Jeffrey was fond of him as a child, and I wanted him to attend the funeral, even if he couldn't make it to the wake. Having not spoken for a while, I wanted to hear his voice and called. But no matter how many times I called Jeffrey's mobile, it wouldn't connect. Even worse, when I tried the next day, I got a message saying the call couldn't be connected. It seemed like I was blocked. The kind Jeffrey, who always stayed in touch over small matters, blocking me. Hard to believe, but with no way to contact him and the funeral not waiting. It proceeded without the Jeffrey couple. Half a year later, Margaret suddenly contacted me. Michelle might be lonely this summer, and Jeffrey has a middle school reunion around the end of the year, so he wants to let loose. Can we spend Christmas vacation at your place? She brought up spending Christmas at my house, without mentioning the wedding gift or the blocked calls during the funeral. To her, maybe those incidents weren't a big deal. It seemed Margaret didn't even consider the possibility of me refusing. Despite my reservations about spending time under the same roof as Margaret, I agreed, hoping to see Jeffrey after so long. Sure, that's fine. I look forward to seeing you both. It's been a while. Then at Christmas, they visited my house. There was a slight discomfort with them around. They were always together. Not in a lovey-dovey or happy way, just together. Margaret followed Jeffrey even to the bathroom or when he needed to fetch something. At first, I thought she had business in the same direction, but it seemed not. It might sound harsh, but Margaret's gaze and movements suggested she was monitoring Jeffrey, ensuring he didn't do anything unusual. I was shocked when I caught a glimpse of Jeffrey's face as I stood up to serve tea. Jeffrey was looking down, avoiding eye contact with Margaret. I struggled to understand why they were in such a situation. But the reason for their behavior would become clear later. In the evening, Jeffrey left for his middle school reunion. Feeling awkward alone with Margaret, I stood up to clean. As usual, I started vacuuming, but suddenly the vacuum cleaner stopped.
Why? It was working fine yesterday.
At that moment, with a loud bang and a strong impact, I found myself knocked over. In the moment, I couldn't grasp what was happening, but I was kicked out into the garden along with the vacuum cleaner. Luckily, I was wearing thick socks, but with the snow outside, I'd freeze if I stayed there. Who would do this? A suspicious person? A burglar? As I tried to get up, I saw it was Margaret who had thrown out the vacuum cleaner and me. Older lady, celebrating Christmas out here suits you.
What? Wait, Margaret, do you realize what you're doing?
Shut up, older lady. I'm looking forward to fun times while he's gone. It'll be a great night without you in the way, so don't interfere. Saying that, Margaret started making a phone call to someone. Apparently a man, judging by the name she called. Her flirting voice and the way she spoke suggested she was planning to meet a lover in this house. Indeed, the house was newly remodeled and minimalistic, thanks to me, but who would think to use their mother-in-law's house, where their husband grew up, to cheat? Margaret, it seemed, was the type to kick out her mother-in-law and bring her lover over, taking advantage of Jeffrey's absence. Margaret is the kind of person who would take advantage of her husband going to a reunion and kick me, her mother-in-law, out of the way because I was in the way and kick me into the snowy yard. Well, I had a plan too. I put on an old pair of shoes and a jacket from the shed and decided to fight back. Firstly, I doubted Jeffrey knew about the affair. Even Jeffrey, who is kindness personified, would surely react if he knew his beloved wife was cheating on him. I needed to contact Jeffrey immediately and have him witness the affair about to happen in this house. But since my calls were blocked on Jeffrey's mobile, I needed a different approach. That's when I thought of Jeffrey's childhood friend. They had been close through college and often dined together even after graduating. The friend ran a delicatessen inherited from their parents in the local shopping district. I headed there, desperately hoping for some information. At the delicatessen, I found his parents, who said he might be at a reunion at a pub in the same shopping district. I rushed to the pub, and luckily, I headed to the pub with the anecdote that it was a small pub and that Jeffrey would be easily recognizable if he was there. I caught Jeffrey returning from a convenience store. Good timing. Margaret kicked me out of the house. She's planning to spend time with some man there. I heard her talking on the phone. Do you know anything about this?
What? Margaret cheating? No way!
Jeffrey immediately left the reunion and headed to my house. I wanted to go too, but he said it was too dangerous since we didn't know who the man was and asked me to stay away. I hid in a nearby business hotel, leaving the matter between Jeffrey and his wife to him. The next day, when I returned home, I found Margaret beaten up in the garden, naked.
Older lady, don't you care to help your daughter-in-law? I can't even get into the house. How did you raise your son?
I couldn't believe the gentle Jeffrey would beat his wife to such an extent and leave her in the garden. Entering the house, I found Jeffrey drinking coffee.
Margaret is naked in the garden. What happened? I don't know. She was arguing with her lover last night, so maybe that's it? She's going to be nothing to me now, so it's not my business.
While I took refuge in the business hotel, Jeffrey had confronted Margaret and her lover at the scene of their affair. Thinking it might serve as evidence, he took photos of the lover's face and even recorded the encounter. I was impressed by his calmness in such a bizarre situation. From the recording, it seemed the lover, not expecting Jeffrey's return, lashed out at Margaret in anger. The recording also captured the lover stripping Margaret of her expensive-looking branded clothes, apparently intending to sell them. After the lover left, it was Jeffrey who stopped Margaret from re-entering the house.
I think you understand from the recording, Margaret isn't repentant. She married me for money and convenience, and she keeps saying her lover is her #1 priority. I have to step out for a bit, so I'll leave Margaret's matter to you, Mom.
Leave it to me? What do you mean?
I didn't want such a person in my house, so I didn't let her in. If Mom wants to let her in, I won't stop you.
With that, Jeffrey left. As far as I was concerned, my daughter-in-law had been awful to me. And now she had gotten her just desserts. I felt no obligation to help her for no reason and decided to leave her as she was. Although Jeffrey's photos and recording gave me a good idea of the situation, I decided to check the security camera footage for a clearer picture. I was thankful I had installed the cameras after hearing about a burglary at a relative's house. Neither Margaret nor her lover seemed to realize their actions were being recorded in someone else's house, causing trouble. While examining the footage and photos, I noticed something familiar about the lover's unusual hat. As I was pondering this, the noise outside caught my attention, accompanied by the doorbell. When I opened the door, there was a police officer. It turned out Margaret had played the victim to the neighbors, leading to a report of an injured, naked woman in the garden. Sorry for the disturbance, officer. Margaret got involved in some trouble, but neither Jeffrey nor I saw her get injured. We have security cameras, so we can explain what kind of trouble it was. I shared the events of the previous night, along with the evidence from the cameras and photos. The police seemed to understand that Jeffrey and I were not involved. However, they couldn't leave an injured, naked woman in the garden in the middle of winter. Margaret was taken away in a police car. Suddenly, I remembered who the man in Jeffrey's photos of the lover was. Just then, Jeffrey returned. Mom, I'm back. I filed for divorce. Margaret and I are now complete strangers.
Divorce? What do you mean?
Margaret has been throwing tantrums when things don't go her way since we got married. I've tried to meet her expectations, but at some point, she started using a pre-filled divorce form as a threat. Jeffrey, having fallen for Margaret, had tried to fulfill her wishes. But Margaret exploited his willingness, acting tyrannically. When things didn't go her way, she used the divorce form as leverage. Hearing this, I was at a loss for words. But then I remembered something and shared it with Jeffrey, who suddenly stood up with an idea, leading me to the police station where Margaret was being temporarily held. "Waited for you, Jeffrey. I knew you'd come. You're my dear husband, not heartless enough to ignore your wife in this state."
What are you saying? We're strangers now. I just came to tell you something with Mom. What do you mean? A bad joke? I understand this older lady coming to apologize, but strangers?
Margaret must have thought Jeffrey was coming to rescue his beloved wife and expected me to apologize for leaving her in the garden.
I submitted the divorce papers with your section filled out, Margaret.
We're no longer a couple.
What? What are you doing, Jeffrey? Remember when you submitted the marriage application without permission? It's too convenient that it's okay when you do it to others, but not when it's done to you, right?
Margaret was speechless at Jeffrey's logical argument, but I had something to say too.
That man you brought home, he's a business owner, right? Yes. He's a young, talented owner of a beauty salon. He proposed with a bouquet of roses last week, saying he'd make me a CEO's wife. That man's actually an unemployed freeloader who caused trouble at a restaurant, leading to his unemployment.
I often browse social media, and recently saw a story about someone causing a scene in a restaurant. I thought I had seen him somewhere before, but he was in the vortex of a topic that has recently come under fire by many people.
I read that this guy was repeatedly getting in trouble for drinking straight from a pitcher of water, putting Tabasco in it, and other such nuisances. I read that he was recently fired from his part-time job. That's a lie. His profile had a long list of accomplishments. He wouldn't do such things. Well, regardless, my house has a lot of damage from his tantrum. I could file a report for the nuisance.
Margaret, convinced she'd become a CEO's wife, was in for more shocks. In order to push Margaret to the edge, we decided to fold in even more.
Also, one of your company's executives is a longtime friend of mine. What? You told my workplace about the affair.
I didn't reveal the affair.
I just discussed your relationship history with Jeffrey. Any problem with that? It's better not to do things you'd be embarrassed to be seen doing.
Shocked by the cascade of revelations, Margaret turned pale. Leaving her behind, I exited the police station. Later, Margaret's mistreatment of me and her affair led to her divorce becoming public at her workplace. She was a long-time employee due for a promotion. But her actions caused her to lose that opportunity. Her terrible behavior led to her being transferred to another region, where everyone knew about her worst ending due to her infidelity.
Why is everyone avoiding me? I was just in a pure romance with a talented CEO. Are they jealous of me, who could have been a CEO's wife? Tell that friend of yours on the board to stop this stupid workplace bullying. You think you're being ostracized and bullied just because you're out of place after being transferred? That's a naive way of thinking. There's nothing I can do about it.
Sorry. Eventually, Margaret had nowhere to belong at work and ended up resigning. And worse, she became homeless.
How can you leave me, your ex-daughter-in-law, without a home in the winter? Isn't it heartless to have a woman shiver outside? What are you saying? Who kicked Mom out into the snow-covered garden? You're only thinking of yourself. Your words and actions don't match.
The apartment where Jeffrey and Margaret lived was a company housing for married employees, so Margaret was evicted due to the divorce. Despite this, Margaret, not giving up, repeatedly harassed Jeffrey.
You're there, aren't you? How can you not help your wife in trouble? Don't you have any kindness? You expect kindness from others while ignoring your own actions? But I guess explaining this is useless.
Not satisfied with harassing Jeffrey, Margaret also came to my place, even following me to the supermarket.
Can you leave your daughter-in-law in this situation? Would you do the same to your son? Your son abandoned his troubled wife.
Abandoned?
Troubled daughter-in-law? You brought this upon yourself. Remember your actions? I don't consider you a daughter-in-law.
Each time, the security system activated or bystanders called the police, making Margaret known as a troublemaker in town. Exhausted by her persistence, Jeffrey and I consulted the police and obtained a restraining order. Margaret, looking for a new target, started attending matchmaking parties, but with no money, job, or proper appearance. She was turned away at the door, becoming infamous as a party crasher. Finally, Margaret's assaults stopped, and we live in peace.
Mom, I was out of my mind back then.
Margaret cut me off from home, screamed at me all day.
I've finally come to my senses.
I'm so sorry. Jeffrey and I are living together again. Whether Jeffrey remarries or stays with me, I'm happy as long as he shows true kindness to others. My husband Curtis looked at me and snapped.
A hospital stay just for an ulcer? It's not that serious of a disease. You're making too much of a big deal out of it.
It seemed like he wasn't worried at all.
It's because you pushed her too hard,
Ashley said, making him uncomfortable, so he declared,
I'll go buy something to drink,
and left the room. After a while, Curtis came back looking very anxious.
You have only a year left to live,
he said solemnly.
What?
I was surprised, wondering if there had been some explanation from the doctor that I was unaware of.
No, I just overheard your parents talking outside. I was going to greet them, but then I heard something like that.
I wondered what my parents were talking about. As we sat in silence, Ashley suddenly burst into laughter.
Pfft. Ha ha ha.
Wondering what was going on, we both looked at Ashley. Then she turned to Curtis and dropped a bombshell.
What are you talking about? Isn't that about your mistress and not Mom?
The air froze. Dad, we know everything.
Hey Stella, isn't breakfast ready yet?
As usual, Curtis called out to me. I was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. It'll be ready soon, I answered while setting up the corn soup and bread on the table.
I told you I have a meeting this morning. I have preparations to make. Hurry up.
I placed the omelet on a plate in front of Curtis, who started eating without a prayer. After all, I was just preparing everything as usual. It was he who overslept. Suppressing my thoughts, I started doing the laundry. Once Curtis hurried out, I finally took a breath of relief. The morning news show started, and I took my breakfast to the lively sound of the TV. As a housewife, I spent my days like this, taking care of Curtis. After 25 years of marriage, with a lot of time spent alone at home, I've been thinking about picking up a hobby, but my shy nature always gets in the way, preventing me from taking the first step. Every day, I prepare breakfast for Curtis, do the laundry, clean, shop. I was getting bored with the repetition of the same days. I've thought about going to work, but I've been frail since I was young, and after giving birth to our daughter Ashley, I became even more prone to illness, so that was not an option.
Will my life just end without anything changing?
As I was thinking this, the doorbell rang. The sound of the front door unlocking was heard, and Ashley entered.
"Mom, are you here?"
she said, opening the door to the living room.
"Welcome back."
Ashley sometimes comes back like this to check on me. When I'm not feeling well, she even helps with the housework. She's such a capable daughter. How are you feeling?
"I've been doing quite well recently."
Ashley looked relieved to see my face, smiling gently.
"That's good to hear. Then, how about we go out for lunch? You must be bored, right?"
she suggested. We went to a restaurant near where Ashley works and talked about her recent life over the meal. These moments were a happy time for me, and also a break from the monotony of my daily life. After finishing our grocery shopping for dinner and returning home, Ashley set down the bags she was carrying and quickly went back to her own place. When I asked if she didn't want to see Curtis, "Dad's probably fine," she simply replied. Indeed, Curtis, at 48, still looked young for his age. He would work out at the gym after work, and lately, he even started caring about his looks, keeping his body fit and his skin lively. He always had high self-esteem, saying,
"I don't want to become someone who gives up just because they're getting older."
Compared to Curtis, I feel like an old woman, overshadowed by him and treated coldly. After Ashley left, a flyer on the table caught my eye. It was something that had been put in the mailbox. The flyer featured a beautiful woman. It seemed to be for a yoga class being held nearby, taught by an active model, offering reasonable prices for people of all ages. I wonder if I could manage yoga, given my frail health. But I found myself making excuses and tucked the flyer away between the pages of a newspaper. Looking at the clock, it was almost 5 p.m. I must start preparing dinner soon. If Curtis comes home and dinner isn't ready, he'll yell at me again. Since he was in a bad mood from the morning, I planned to make his favorite dishes. And so, I found myself preparing dinner for Curtis again, as usual. Around 7 p.m., Curtis came home. I immediately started preparing the shower. Curtis prefers to shower before dinner. While waiting for the shower to be ready, Curtis was drinking a can of beer and reading the newspaper in the living room.
"Wow! Isn't she a beauty?"
I was startled by his sudden outburst, only to realize he was looking at the yoga class flyer I had tucked in. Huh. A model and yoga instructor, huh. It's close to our house too. Hey, why don't you give it a try? He said, looking at me with a sarcastic tone.
"An old woman like me going there would just be a nuisance."
I brushed it off lightly, but he sighed. "You always say that. Try to take care of your body a little." It seemed he was also tired of my negative thinking.
"You used to be good in your younger days, but you're becoming more of an old woman day by day."
He left those words behind and headed to the bathroom. When did I start to feel so miserable? It had become so routine that I seemed to have become numb to it. But even so, I can't go back to my younger days. I knew all too well that the reason I never took action was none other than myself. Envious of the radiant smile of the woman on the yoga class flyer, I felt like I was living in a world far removed from blaming someone or something else. On his next day off, Curtis left with the yoga class flyer.
"Are men allowed to go there too?"
It was a class held at a young woman's home. Wondering if that was really okay, I asked.
"It says here people of all ages and genders. So it should be fine. I'm just going to observe. If it's not okay, I'll come right back."
He left the house cheerfully, leaving me behind. I wish he had taken me with him. Even though I had chosen not to go, I found myself blaming others again. Fed up with myself, I decided to go for a walk for a change of scenery. I wondered if I could catch a glimpse of what the yoga class was like, even if from outside. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, perfect for a walk. I walked at my own pace. Eventually, I reached the neighboring town where the yoga class was. I didn't remember the address from the flyer, but I had a rough map in my head. And so, I walked looking for the yoga studio sign. Yoga. Yoga. Then I realized there were no signs for a yoga studio around here. I can't tell where it is. Just as I was about to give up and go back, I heard a familiar laugh. Turning the corner towards the sound, I saw a man and a woman I recognized, sitting at a garden table, enjoying tea. It was unmistakable. Curtis and the yoga class instructor. Not wanting Curtis to notice me, I couldn't hear what they were talking about, but they seemed to be having a great time. Despite being my husband, I was impressed that he didn't seem out of place even next to a young woman. Suddenly, I felt miserably shabby and pathetic. Unable to stay still, I quickly returned the way I came. Why do I always end up like this? All the way home, I kept blaming myself. It wasn't just about my deteriorated appearance. Above all, I needed to do something about this self-deprecating personality. I resolved to change. In the evening, as I was preparing dinner, Curtis came home in a particularly good mood. How was the yoga class? My heart raced, wondering if he knew I had seen him having a good time.
Yeah, it was fun. The teacher was around Ashley's age, but she had proper qualifications as an instructor and seemed very competent.
So she was that young. I wondered what kind of conversations they had, what made them enjoy their time so much. I became a bit curious. Maybe I should try yoga too. I murmured to myself then. No, that would be impossible for you. Curtis looked me up and down exaggeratedly before laughing. There were a few others there, but none like an old woman like you. You'd just embarrass yourself. Hearing that, I got angry. I was jealous of the yoga instructor, but I had been trying to think more positively. Seeing my expression, "If you're so angry, you should have done something about it sooner," he said dismissively before disappearing into the bathroom. I thought about attending on a weekday when Curtis wouldn't know, but I was sure they'd identify us as a couple based on our last name or address. If Curtis found out, he'd surely berate me. So, despite my resolve earlier in the day, I became gloomy and secluded myself. 3 months had passed since Curtis started attending the yoga class. He went there on his days off, not just for yoga, but it seemed he was also helping with minor DIY for home decor and other small errands. Isn't that something you shouldn't have to help with? I brought it up to Curtis, concerned, but he snapped at me.
A girl around Ashley's age is in trouble, and you won't let me help her? Or do you think there's something shady going on? Ridiculous.
Even though he's not the kind to help around the house even when I'm feeling unwell. It was unbearable to feel like he valued the instructor more than me. But I couldn't neglect my household duties. I focused more on housework, and Curtis complained about me even more. Ashley, who occasionally came to help, said to Curtis,
"Dad, you're being too harsh on Mom."
But he dismissed her.
"That's Stella's job. If you've moved out, don't interfere."
Ashley, perhaps fed up with Curtis, started coming back when he wasn't around. Then one day, I finally fell ill and collapsed. Luckily, Ashley was coming home that day and took me to the hospital. Ashley was shocked to find me curled up in the kitchen, thinking her heart would stop. She even contacted my parents, who live nearby, and I was surprised to see them visit me in the hospital bed after the examination. I couldn't help it. "You're already frail," Ashley said, looking down. Who could blame her for worrying? "Thank you for worrying about me." After explaining the examination results to Ashley and my parents, they left the room, relieved. I was diagnosed with a gastric ulcer. After seeing my parents off, Ashley came back to the room to vent.
I contacted Dad too. He's late, isn't he?
I knew Curtis wouldn't leave work early to rush over for me. But it still felt lonely. I'll come again tomorrow. You'll need a change of clothes, right? Ashley couldn't bear to leave me looking so forlorn. I was grateful to have raised such a kind daughter. That was my only pride. I'll contact Dad again. See you tomorrow. Ashley left, but Curtis didn't come to the hospital room that day. The next day, Ashley brought me the things I needed for my hospital stay. Looking somewhat guilty, Curtis was standing behind her. As soon as he saw me, he sneered.
A hospital stay just for an ulcer? It's not that serious of a disease. You're making too much of a big deal out of it.
He seemed not to be worried at all.
You've been pushing her too hard,
Ashley said, making him uncomfortable, so he announced,
I'll go buy something to drink,
and left the room.
Really, I can't believe him, of all people.
Ashley seemed thoroughly disgusted. I thought he might just leave, but surprisingly, he came back quickly and very anxious.
You have only a year left to live,
Curtis said, looking serious. It seemed it was no joke.
What?
I was shocked, wondering if there had been some explanation from the doctor that I was unaware of.
I just overheard your parents talking outside. I was going to greet them, but then I heard something like that.
I wondered what my parents were talking about. As we sat in silence, Ashley suddenly started laughing.
Puffed. Ha ha ha.
Wondering what was going on, the two of us looked at Ashley. Then Ashley turned to Curtis and said something shocking.
What are you talking about? Isn't that about your mistress and not Mom?
The atmosphere froze. Stella, are you okay? I came to check on you. Cutting through the tension, my parents arrived.
Grandma, Grandpa. I was just about to talk about everything.
So, we're doing it now. Dad was silent, but his glare kept Curtis from running away. Dad, we know everything. Ashley began to tell everything. It was about a month after Curtis started going to the yoga class. On her way home from our house, Ashley witnessed something unbelievable. That day, I had been telling Ashley about the yoga class. I reconsidered wanting to go myself and asked Ashley to check it out for me. I asked her to go and ask if it was really a kind of place that would make me feel out of place, like Curtis said. I could have gone myself, but I was scared. Sure, I can even check it out on my way home today. Ashley agreed cheerfully and went to the yoga class. When Ashley got close to the studio, she saw someone leaving the entrance. She quickly hid around the corner to see it was apparently Curtis and the instructor. Curtis was supposed to be at work that day, but Ashley couldn't have mistaken her own father. Feeling something was off, Ashley stayed hidden and watched. After a while of conversation, Curtis and the woman, after checking their surroundings, leaned in and kissed. Ashley was shocked and couldn't suppress her feelings of contempt after seeing her father like that. That's why she started coming home only when Curtis wasn't there. After watching Curtis leave, Ashley immediately contacted me.
Mom, you'd better stay away from there.
Ashley, usually so positive, saying something like that made me ask what was wrong, but she wouldn't say.
I just feel like you and that instructor wouldn't get along.
Looking back, it must have been Ashley's kindness trying not to alarm me. Unaware, I regretted missing another chance to go to the yoga class, but a few days later, while walking near the studio again, I spotted a suspicious woman hiding by a fence, seemingly trying to peek inside.
How disturbing.
Approaching, I realized it was Ashley. What was she doing? She hadn't noticed me approaching. Not wanting to startle her, I stopped and called her mobile. hoping it was someone else, but knowing it was Ashley. My wish shattered when she noticed the call from me and walked away from the studio to answer.
Hello, Ashley? What are you doing there?
I asked, sighing. Surprised, Ashley looked around and saw me. And when she saw me in the distance, I'm coming over. She ended the call and hurried to me.
I thought there was some suspicious person.
Seeing my disapproving face, she looked awkward.
So, what were you doing?
Staring back at me, she said.
We'll stand out here. Let's talk somewhere else.
Deciding something, she began walking.
We can go to our house since Curtis won't be back yet.
Feeling the seriousness, we headed home. Upon arriving home, I made some tea. After taking a moment to relax, I once again asked Ashley.
So, what were you doing there? That's the yoga studio Curtis attends, right?
I had previously asked her to scout the place for me, to see what the atmosphere was like, but I thought that matter had been resolved then.
Look, before I say anything else, I want you to know that I'm always on your side, no matter what.
Starting with that, Ashley told me everything she had seen. On the day she went to observe the yoga studio, she saw Curtis and the instructor coming out looking cozy. They talked intimately and kissed after checking their surroundings. She had been hesitant to tell me, carrying the burden alone to avoid hurting me.
I wanted to believe in Dad, too,
Ashley said, sipping her tea. She had wanted to believe, so she kept going back to the yoga studio. But contrary to her hopes, Curtis was frequently there, getting along well with the instructor.
I was thinking, if I could somehow catch them in the act.
If she had proof, she could confront Curtis. She thought by having something over him, she could make him stop treating me badly.
I could have been reported for stalking.
Discovering her there helped Ashley regain her composure.
Yes.
Despite hearing about Curtis's affair, I somehow remained calm. I had suspected something beyond just yoga lessons. Curtis denied it, but I lacked the courage to delve further.
Hey, Mom. Are we just going to leave things as they are?
Ashley looked at me worriedly.
If you're up for it, I'm willing to help.
I immediately understood what she was hinting at.
You're asking if I'm considering divorce?
Ashley just nodded without saying a word. What do I want? I asked myself. Honestly, even if I decided to divorce, I wasn't sure I could make it on my own. Having been a housewife all this time, could I really find work? Plus, there were my health concerns. Ashley offered her support, but I couldn't always depend on her. Sensing my deep thought, Ashley reassured me. Even if you decide not to divorce, like I said earlier, I'm always on your side. And left before Curtis came home. Curtis arrived and immediately started complaining about everything as usual. The taste of dinner, the cleanliness of the house, as if he was searching for faults on purpose. Had it not been for the discussion with Ashley earlier, I might have been able to ignore it, but today I couldn't. Hearing the facts from Ashley, everything Curtis did started to disgust me. His voice, being in the same room, everything felt repulsive. That night, after Curtis had gone to sleep, I decided to check his mobile phone in a desperate search for evidence. If there was proof, I would divorce him. I knew it was wrong, but the betrayal started with Curtis. Convincing myself, I checked his phone. But my last hope was shattered. Texts and photos with the instructor, undeniable evidence of his affair, were there. Quietly closing the phone, I went to the living room and lay down on the sofa. I couldn't bear to sleep in the same room.
I'll contact Ashley first thing tomorrow.
And that's how our plan began. Ashley and I decided to inform my parents first. If the divorce went through, I'd move back to my parents' house. So, it was necessary to explain the situation. Hearing this, my parents were furious. After discussing it as a group, we decided to act at the moment that would make the yoga instructor the happiest. During her surveillance, Ashley found out the instructor apparently had another man.
I'll attend the yoga class and gather information.
Saying that, Ashley started attending the yoga class and got closer to Curtis's mistress, Hilda. It turned out, just as Ashley had guessed, Hilda was engaged and planning to get married in a year.
We'll target that time to demand alimony in the divorce trial.
Ashley was oddly enthusiastic, but I felt heavy-hearted. I was anxious about whether I could let Curtis be free for so long and act as if everything was normal. Even now, just living in the same house made me feel sick. My anxiety and the stress of living with Curtis culminated in me developing a gastric ulcer. After telling me all that had happened, honestly, I didn't realize you were under so much stress. I'm sorry, Ashley said. When I was taken to the hospital, she discussed with my parents and decided to change the plan to immediate divorce and claim alimony. Hearing Ashley's story, Curtis just hung his head in silence.
The 1 year left you heard about was referring to your mistress Hilda's modeling career.
Ashley spoke coldly and formally to Curtis.
There's no need for such drastic measures. A normal divorce would suffice. Don't destroy someone's happiness like that.
Hearing Curtis prioritize Hilda's happiness over our divorce, I felt an anger like never before. Before Ashley could retort, I confronted Curtis.
The one who has been destroying my happiness talks now.
Curtis looked at me as if bitten by his own dog.
After all the exploitation, not caring about my health, but worrying about another woman, it's disgusting.
I had never known I could despise someone so much. It was the first time I realized that I had such feelings inside me.
Disgusting, you say? You don't have the right to talk back to me.
My negative emotions were overflowing. Ashley tried to intervene, but she seemed bewildered by my anger. Just as I was about to lash out at Curtis again, Mom intervened softly.
That's enough, Stella.
Her voice was gentle and comforting. A voice I'd known since childhood. I snapped back to reality. After a moment of silence, Mom calmly addressed Curtis.
Curtis. I've heard the situation from both Ashley and Stella, but I haven't heard it from you.
Curtis looked uncomfortable.
If you have any justification, we're listening.
Her voice, different from when she scolded me earlier, now carried a chill.
I don't have any excuses.
Curtis stammered.
So, you admit everything is true?
Seemingly accepting his fate, Curtis defiantly admitted.
Yes. I love Hilda, not Stella. I can't help it. Stella no longer attracts me.
That's terrible.
Ashley muttered.
Terrible, you say? Which is worse? I thought Hilda and I loved each other. But to think, Hilda had another man.
It seemed Curtis didn't know about Hilda's fiancé. He trembled, fighting back tears.
Do you understand what you're saying?
Mom confronted Curtis.
After making Stella feel the same way, how dare you feel sorry for yourself only?
Curtis looked down, unable to raise his face. Ashley and Mom spoke for me, but I felt nothing for Curtis anymore. I just wanted to be away from him. That was my only wish.
With the divorce, we'll also be claiming alimony from you and Hilda, so please leave for today.
I told Curtis formally. He stood up weakly, avoided our gazes, and left the hospital room. I cried over the wasted time I had spent with such a man. After being discharged, Ashley and I went to Hilda's yoga studio. It was under the guise of Ashley canceling her membership, but we intended to tell Hilda everything. However, just as we were about to start, Curtis barged in. As we stood dumbfounded, Curtis snatched Hilda's mobile phone from her resisting hands and called her fiancé. In a fit of desperation, Curtis exposed everything to the fiancé and laughed maniacally. After fiddling with Hilda's phone, he threw it at her and left, making deliberate noise with his steps. As Hilda sat on the floor, I told her, "That was my husband. Why has it come to this?" Hilda looked up at me with surprise, but retorted,
"That man approached me. If you're his wife, you should at least teach your husband some manners."
"I'm getting divorced, and we have all the evidence of the affair," Ashley countered with equal fervor. "Whatever you think, we will be claiming alimony in the divorce trial." Realizing talking here wouldn't make Hilda admit anything, I decided to leave her house with Ashley. Later, Hilda tried to make excuses to her fiancé, but since Curtis had exposed irrefutable photos and messages, her engagement was called off. Furthermore, since Hilda's fiancé was the owner of the entertainment agency she belonged to, she ended up being blacklisted from modeling work. Of course, her yoga studio, financed by her fiancé, was closed down soon after. This story was briefly mentioned in gossip magazines, so whether it was entirely true or not is uncertain. However, a for-lease sign was definitely posted on the yoga studio's house. Faced with undeniable evidence, Curtis and Hilda couldn't resist and had to comply with the compensation claim. After the divorce, I stayed at my parents' house for a while, but moved due to harassment from Curtis and Hilda. Both Curtis and Hilda probably thought they could handle the situation at first, but eventually fell apart. Chased by the alimony payments, Curtis lost his money for gym and beauty treatments, his appearance deteriorated, yet he still made advances on young women at work and ended up being sued. He was fired from his job and even in his new job was relegated to a menial position, spending his days alone organizing documents and supplies. He blamed me for his downfall, claiming it was all because I discovered the affair and filed for divorce. As seen in the tabloids, Hilda, after being abandoned by her fiancé, was sued for the yoga studio's business expenses and chased by debt. She blamed me for her misfortune. My parents quickly sold their house and bought a condominium where the four of us could live together. The condominium has excellent security, so we no longer need to fear harassment from Curtis and Hilda. Feeling it pathetic to rely solely on Ashley's income and my parents' pensions, I learned to use a computer from Ashley and started working from home. I'm surprised to find I had such a talent. Today, I'm writing a column about life's battles. My life might have been an uneventful housewife's, but this divorce saga is sure to attract attention. While adding a bit of color to the story, I type the words. My face is wrapped in a gentle smile.